Every capital city has two faces. The face it shows the world, parliament buildings, monuments, curated public image, and the face it shows only to those who look close enough. Canberra's public face is well known. The purpose-built bush capital, the city of public servants, of the War Memorial, the National Gallery, and Walter Burley Griffin's plan geometry. A city other Australians joke about. Too boring, too cold, too full of roundabouts and government acronyms. But underneath the plan perfection, Canberra has layers the tourism brochure doesn't include. Secrets that aren't conspiracy theories, documented, archived, in some cases still classified. Displacement predating the first surveyor's peg, intelligence and military infrastructure whose full scope Australians aren't permitted to know, environmental disasters, unexplained deaths in the lake, institutions that shaped Australian history in ways still being processed. This video examines 12 things about Australia's capital that it would prefer you didn't look at too closely. Number 1 is happening right now, documented in public records, affecting every Australian, rarely explained in terms that make the implications clear. Stay to the end. Canberra is not the boring city the rest of Australia thinks it is. It's where Australia's most consequential decisions are made and its most consequential secrets are kept, a darkness of power exercised without adequate transparency, in a city designed from the start to be the administrative heart of a continent. Administrative hearts, it turns out, can be very dark places. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Let's begin. Canberra was established in 1913, a compromise capital after Sydney and Melbourne couldn't agree which city should host the new government. The limestone plains site, cold, isolated, largely undeveloped, was chosen partly for geographic neutrality, partly for its apparent emptiness. It was not empty. The Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples had been on these plains for thousands of years. Their displacement isn't the opening story of the Canberra tourism narrative. It's the opening story of this video. 12 things about the dark side of Canberra. Starting now. Number 12. The Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples and the country beneath the capital. The land Canberra was built on is the traditional country of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, occupied and managed for at least 20,000 years. Its watercourses, camping grounds, and places of spiritual significance were known to these peoples in ways no European survey had mapped. When the Commonwealth selected the site in 1908, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri were not consulted. Their presence was acknowledged in administrative records only as a logistical matter, managed under the existing New South Wales Aboriginal Protection Framework. The dispossession was not dramatic forced removal, it was quieter and bureaucratic, a people whose presence simply wasn't factored into the decision about what the land would become. The capital was built on Aboriginal country, and its founding narrative has never centrally included the peoples who were there first. Formal acknowledgement has grown in recent decades, welcome to country at major events, and Ngunnawal names for new suburbs, Aboriginal cultural centres. Genuine progress. But the land on which Parliament sits is Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and acknowledging that at the opening of sessions doesn't fully resolve what it means that the capital was established without the consent of the people already there. Number 11. Pine Gap and what Australia is not permitted to know about its own territory. Pine Gap sits outside Alice Springs, 1,500 kilometres from Canberra. But it's a Canberra story. Its decisions, oversight, and accountability are functions of Canberra's political and intelligence system. Pine Gap is the joint Australian-American Signals Intelligence Facility processing satellite data for both governments and the Five Eyes network, operational since 1970. Its full functions are classified. Publicly, it monitors electronic communications, sharing intelligence that supports military operations. Pine Gap operates under a treaty successive governments have renewed without public debate on its terms. The small number of ministers with oversight know more than the public is permitted to. Whether that oversight is meaningful is itself classified. Drone strikes in Afghanistan, Yemen, and elsewhere that Pine Gap intelligence has contributed to targeting have been documented by journalists. Australians never voted on this. The decision was made in Canberra, inside a classification framework that prevents public accountability. Number 10. The 2003 Canberra bushfires and the city that burned from within. On January 18, 2003, fires driven by extreme heat and wind swept through Canberra's outer suburbs. 4 people were killed, 500 houses destroyed, thousands evacuated. The Mount Stromlo Observatory, with instruments dating from the late 19th century, was destroyed completely. It was Australia's worst urban fire disaster since Cyclone Tracy destroyed Darwin in 1974. The conditions were not unprecedented, the risk had been identified, and the combination of extreme heat, low humidity, and high wind that drives the worst Australian fire behaviour was forecast. Coronial and Senate inquiries in 2003-04 found failures in hazard reduction burning, emergency response, and public warning. The observatory's destruction was a scientific loss not fully communicated at the time, decades of work gone in hours. It's been partially rebuilt, but the historical collection is lost. The 2003 fires are less nationally known than Black Saturday or Ash Wednesday, both with higher death tolls. Their significance: fire through the capital suburbs, destroying 500 homes and a century of scientific heritage, has never been proportionally represented in the national narrative of Australian fire disaster. Number 9. Lake Burley Griffin and what has, and hasn't, been found in its depths. Created by damming the Molonglo River in 1963, Lake Burley Griffin is the centrepiece of Griffin's plan for the capital. Beautiful, central to Canberra's identity, reflecting Parliament House and the Carillon. It's also, by ACT Emergency Services records, a significant location for deaths, drownings, recovered bodies, and occasionally human remains whose official determinations haven't always fully satisfied those with specific knowledge of the cases. Water quality issues have been a matter of record since the lake's creation. Toxic cyanobacterial blooms have repeatedly closed it to recreation, fed by agricultural and urban runoff. Less publicly known is the lake's record as a place where things are found: vehicles, belongings, human remains. It's presented as a recreational amenity. Its darker record isn't part of that presentation. Number 8. ASIO and Canberra as the centre of Australia's domestic intelligence. ASIO, Australia's Domestic Intelligence Agency, is headquartered in a purpose-built Canberra facility completed in 2013, designed to minimise its visual presence despite a significant footprint. ASIO's history includes chapters its current communications don't foreground. During the Cold War, it surveilled a wide range of Australians, not only potential communist agents but union members, peace activists, academics, and journalists, regardless of genuine threat. The ongoing release of Cold War-era ASIO files since the 1990s has revealed the breadth of that program, including surveillance of people exercising entirely legal political rights, and relationships between ASIO and employers who sometimes received information about employees' politics, judgment failures that have drawn sustained historical scrutiny. What ASIO does today is, appropriately, not public knowledge. What the historical record shows is that the boundary between legitimate security intelligence and politically motivated surveillance has been crossed before. Number 7. The Royal Military College Duntroon and the darkness within its walls. Established in 1911 on former Duntroon pastoral land, itself in Ngunnawal country before that, the college trains army officers who have commanded forces in every conflict since the First World War. Duntroon's reputation extends beyond its formal training mission. Hazing and initiation practices have been documented in internal inquiries and public accounts across decades. The 1998 DLA Piper Review documented systematic physical and sexual abuse of officer cadets by senior students, within a culture that discouraged reporting and punished complainants, abuse that would be criminal outside the institution. The military's response was, by advocates and reviewers' assessment, inadequate to the scale documented. Reforms followed, but the culture that produced the abuse, isolation, hierarchy, suppressed complaint, proved more durable than the practices reviews identified. Whether post-1998 reforms have been sufficient is a question advocates and former cadets keep raising. Number 6. The lobbying industry and the shadow government operating in Canberra. The formal institutions of Australian government, Parliament, the public service, statutory authorities, are visible and formally accountable to the electorate. Alongside them operates a lobbying industry whose influence on policy is significant, poorly documented, and inadequately regulated. The Commonwealth's public lobbying register documents which organisations employ registered lobbyists and which officials they've met. It's profoundly incomplete. Industry dinners, think tank events, and relationships between former politicians turned consultants and old colleagues go entirely unrecorded. The revolving door between senior public or ministerial roles and private lobbying is well documented by researchers but inadequately regulated by law. Cooling off periods for former ministers' lobbying industries they once regulated are widely seen as insufficient. Policy decisions shaped by lobbying, resources, finance, health, telecommunications, are documented through leaks and insider accounts, suggesting a gap between what Parliament formally decides and what actually determines it. Not unique to Australia, but particularly concentrated in Canberra. Number 5. The Australian War Memorial and the commemoration choices it reflects. The War Memorial, its Byzantine dome, Cloisters of Remembrance, Eternal Flame, is one of Australia's most visited and emotionally powerful sites, commemorating Australian deaths in conflict from the Boer War through Afghanistan and Iraq comprehensively and movingly. It does not, in any central way, commemorate the frontier wars, the extended, violent conflict between settlers and Aboriginal Australians that began with first settlement and continued over a century, producing deaths on both sides and shaping the continent the way military conflicts always do. This exclusion has been debated by historians, Aboriginal leaders, and memorial officials for decades. Defenders cite the founding mandate and definitional questions about what constitutes war. Critics argue it reflects a choice about which deaths matter in the national military narrative. The memorial has announced plans for greater recognition of frontier conflict. Whether that means genuine reconsideration remains to be seen. Number 4. The National Arboretum and the land the 2003 fires cleared. Opened in 2013 on the Stromlo Hills, the National Arboretum's rare tree collection and landscape design have made it one of Canberra's most visited attractions. Built on land cleared when the pine plantations covering Stromlo were destroyed by the 2003 fires. Turning a disaster site into something extraordinary was one of the more remarkable pieces of recent Canberra planning. But the Stromlo Hills are in Ngunnawal country, with cultural significance predating the plantations, the observatory, and the arboretum. The institution has engaged with that connection, acknowledgements, some consultation, but the relationship between its botanical mission and the indigenous significance of the land remains ongoing rather than resolved. The land it sits on has a history that beauty doesn't erase. Number 3. Canberra's governance institutions and the democratic deficit they represent. Australia has a deserved reputation for stable, functional democracy, real institutions, free and fair elections, genuine rule of law. But Canberra's institutional culture has also produced features whose democratic health is contested, documented, just less well known than the reputation. The donation disclosure framework is among the weakest of comparable democracies. Donations below certain thresholds go undisclosed, letting significant private money flow into parties invisibly to voters. The parliamentary expenses system has produced sustained scandal across the political spectrum, with reforms after each scandal failing to prevent the next. Accountability mechanisms, the Audit Office, parliamentary committees, freedom of information, are real but operate within constraints Parliament itself sets, a conflict of interest in which the accountable institution writes its own rules. Canberra designed Australia's democracy. Its institutional culture represents both the achievements and the limitations. Number 2. Canberra's relationship with climate science and the gap between knowledge and action. The Bureau of Meteorology and CSIRO produce some of the most sophisticated climate monitoring and impact research in the Southern Hemisphere, describing with increasing precision what climate change is doing to Australia. The gap between what this data shows and what federal governments have done is one of the most documented features of Australian political life over the past 3 decades. Debates over carbon pricing, emissions targets, and the energy transition have been conducted with full access to the scientific evidence, and have consistently produced outcomes the scientific community calls inadequate. This gap isn't a knowledge gap, it's a political economy gap, the distance between the fossil fuel industry's interests, well represented in Canberra, and the climate's interests, represented in no equivalent institutional form. Canberra has the data. Canberra has made the decisions. The relationship between them is the darkness this entry points to. Number 1. What the dark side of Canberra reveals about Australia. This video has examined 12 things about Canberra its public face doesn't foreground, documented, real, and consequential. None are conspiracy theories. None require secret knowledge. They sit in the historical, parliamentary, and scientific record, in released intelligence files, coronial inquiries, and investigative journalism. What do they have in common? They all describe gaps between what Canberra does and what it tells Australians, between the country's founding on Aboriginal land and the formal acknowledgement of that founding, between intelligence operations on Australian territory and what citizens are permitted to know, between formal democratic accountability and the informal influence shaping actual decisions, between the climate knowledge Canberra holds and the climate decisions it makes. These gaps aren't random, they're structural, produced by the concentration of administrative power, the density of lobbying, classification frameworks, the intelligence community, the political donation system, and the distance, physical and psychological, between the city where decisions are made and the Australians they affect. Canberra is not boring. It's the opposite. It's the city where Australia's most consequential decisions are made and its most consequential secrets are kept. The roundabouts, the public service culture, the cold winters, that's the camouflage. Underneath is a city doing things that affect every Australian, in ways every Australian is incompletely informed about. The dark side of Canberra isn't dramatic in the way of ghost towns or haunted buildings. It's the darkness of institutional power exercised in a bubble, remote from most Australians, insulated from most Australians, deciding the futures of most Australians through processes most Australians cannot fully see. Understanding that darkness isn't conspiracy. It's the minimum requirement of informed citizenship in a democracy. Share this video. Subscribe. And next time someone tells you Canberra is boring, tell them what boring looks like when it has security clearance. See you in the next one.